In my entire journey of learning, and especially in improving my learning efficiency, there's one thing which I have seen, which is actually very simple and yet very powerful that most people may not be aware about. That if you just apply, if you start applying right now, may be able to actually increase your learning efficiency to actually a very bigger percentage. And that is exactly what I'm going to be talking about. And so if you're interested in that, then just stick around. Hello everyone. Now, if you're new here, hi, my name is Simon. I'm a final year medical student at the University of Zambia. On this channel, I share most of the learning techniques that I believe are very efficient. I also share basic productivity tips and also some of the takeaway lessons that I get from the books that I read. Now, with all of that said, let's get back. Now, one of the things that you have to understand fundamentally in order for you to appreciate the logic and the application of the technique that I'm going to be giving you is just the nature of knowledge. Have you ever really thought about the reason as to why you are always learning things in part? Now, of course, the most obvious reason is that you cannot learn everything at the same time. But why is it that there is a continuous progression from easier or simpler things into more and more complex things? For example, when you started from grade 1, there were simpler things and they get a bit more complex and they got a bit more complex continuously, just like that. Now, it's very intuitive to think about that, but what I believe is most people do not actually bring that same technique into their very study session. Like if you're going to be studying just for an hour, you don't think of knowledge in that way. One thing we must understand about knowledge is that knowledge is very complex. Now, anything that is complex, the way I want you to be thinking about it is that any complex thing is actually made up of multiple simpler things. Now, it is your ability to master these simpler things that allows you to be able to understand the complex. And it's just because probably our brains are not that powerful to the level of understanding very complex things in their complexity, just as they are presented. We have to break down things in simpler things. That is the reason as to why knowledge is presented in such a manner. If you just think about it, for example, for me as a medical student, I will not be taught the entire body systems in one go. I will be taught each system at a time. But in the actual sense, all of the systems make up a human body and all of the systems are working in conjunction with the other. They communicate, they work together. One affects the other, but you have to learn them separately so that you are able to understand a much simpler level of knowledge so that you can actually bring together the complexity. But you can actually bring this to the micro level, to the level of a topic. So the technique that I'm about to talk about, it is very simple, but stick around to the end of this video because if you mess up with the application, it may not work as well for you. So the technique is basically just break things down. However, you are not breaking things down arbitrarily, you are breaking things meaningfully. So break things down. Now, what I mean by meaningful breaking down is if someone was to say, okay, I'm going to be teaching you things, in a broken down manner, but they take a few things from one topic, a few things from another topic and another and put a small unit, you will discover that most of the things are not going to be related. And so that breaking down is not necessarily meaningful. Let's say, for example, if you are at school and the teacher says, okay, we are going to be teaching you in segments of 1 hour, but in this 1 hour, one sentence is going to be from the subject of mathematics, one sentence is going to be from the subject of science, the other from social studies, and the other from whatever. You will discover that that is not going to make a lot of sense, even though you have taken specific pieces from different parts of complex knowledge. So you want to break things down. So you want to break things down in a grouping that they are mostly related into. However, to make things more practical, the way I would like you to think about knowledge is that knowledge in its complexity has fundamental layers, or I could say. So knowledge in its complexity has fundamental layers, and these fundamental layers now remember, this is not absolute. This is mostly for discussion so that you can be able to apply. Number one is that you have the logic layer. So the logic layer is the layer of knowledge that is just intuitive. Now, what is intuitive to one person may not necessarily be intuitive to another. For example, there are a lot of things that to a person who has been practicing medicine or who has been an engineer for a very long time that are just logic. They don't have to even think about it. It is just intuitively so. And so, depending at the level that you're at and your prior knowledge, your logic layer may be different from another. but it has a lot of similarities, and I'm going to give you an example of that. The second layer that we have is the concepts layer. Now, the concepts layer has the most things that feed into the logic. So the things that start to differentiate one field of information from the other. The logic layer can actually be applied across different fields of information, but the concepts layer is one thing that starts to differentiate one part of knowledge in its complexity and uniqueness from the other. And then from the concepts, what you have is the details. So now the details are those things that are data. Really, they are data and they feed into the concepts to actually make the concepts much more meaningful and their application to actually be better. And under details, I could say there are those which are very important details and other details are not as important, so we could just say they are arbitrary. So now this breaking down of knowledge is exactly how you want to be learning them, because if you understand the logic very well, the concepts can easily feed into the logic. And if your concepts are rock solid, your details can easily feed into your concepts. All of this makes learning easier and faster. Now, when I say easier and faster, I do not mean that they happen without effort. What I actually mean is the amount of energy and the amount of time that you will use to actually come to a good level of expertise. If you follow breaking down information in this manner and learning this, is going to be much, much faster and easier, more effective than a person who is just going with the flow and allowing chance and time to happen to them. So how exactly are you going to be applying this? Well, it is not possible for me to tell you exactly how this is going to apply to every situation that you're going to be doing, but I'm going to give you an example, one example that resonates a lot with me because I'm a medical student, but I'm going to give it in such a way that you can be able to apply it to a lot of other fields of information. So let me give you an example. Let's say, for example, I'm a student and I am learning about hypertension. Now I'll just write this. This is how hypertension is abbreviated. So I'm going to learn about hypertension. Now, for those who do not know, hypertension is just high blood pressure. So now, for me, generally, if you hear high, meaning there is a low, and if there is a low and a high, probably there is a normal. So I'm just thinking, okay, so if there is a high, there is a low, and there is a normal. That's just logic. It's very intuitive. So I'm thinking, okay, normal. So a person can have normal blood pressure. It can be high or it can be low. Now, these are not necessarily hypertension being broken down into three, but I'm sure you could see the reason as to why I'm putting this. Now, if hypertension, I'm learning it in a hospital and as a medical student, obviously it must be bad. And if it's bad, it causes problems. You get the point, right? So what I'm getting from this point is hypertension is not normal. It is not good. So it is bad. It is not normal. So it's bad. You get the point, right? That is just within the logic layer. But because me, I'm a medical student and I have been doing this, I'm mostly involved with studying information that is in this sector. My level of expertise, at least even just as a student, would tell me that if something is bad, remember a person is created in a very perfect way, at least before falling. That's not medical school. That's higher levels of information, which is in the Bible. Of course, what I'm trying to explain here is one thing which I know is if hypertension is bad and there is normal hypertension, then there definitely should be a cause that causes that normal to turn into bad. However, I also pass through basics of physics, so there are some things which make intuitively sense to me because I know that, okay, pressure, I know the formula for pressure. There are things that make pressure. There is force and there is area. Yeah. So if I can just temper with the force, or if I could just temper with the area, then definitely I'm going to temper with what? The pressure. And I understand again from my physics. Now, I'm giving you examples because this is my expertise. From my physics, that pressure can be directly related to the resistance. And the resistance can be also related to the flow. Now, these are some of the things which may not make intuitive sense to you, but for me they make sense. But at this point, I'm just thinking of the logic. So right now for me, the logic is hypertension is bad. There should be a normal. And if there is something which is normal, for it to become bad, there must be a cause. And this cause is that thing that goes and tampers with one of the things that affect pressure. It could be the force, it could be the area, it could be the resistance, or it could be the flow. And I'm already thinking in that manner. And now when I move from there, you will discover that I will no longer be in the logic layer. I will now start speaking on the concepts layer, because now I'll be getting into, okay, if there is a cause, now I'll get a bit more medical and say, okay, what are the possible causes of this? And I'll start building on top of that with my concepts. Now, this is a topic that I understand very well, at least to the level that I am at. That is the reason as to why I'm able to produce for you this level of logic and concepts. But when I am studying things for the first time, I am asking specific questions. What makes sense? What builds the logic layer? And I'm trying to read and get the logic layer from the book. And from there, I can continue to build on top of that and add my concepts. And after I've added my concepts, if I, for example, I find out the causes and everything, I may want to find the exact details about that cause that I should know. What are the risk factors? What are the what? Those are the details that feed into my concepts. And after I have done that, I can also add the other arbitrary, details. Some may be important, some may not be important. Some may be hard to even integrate in this model. I'll just literally just have to memorize, dependent on my level of expertise. Now, I'm sure this may look like a mouthful at this point of time, but one of the things which I love about instruction is that when you don't understand the concept a lot, get the application, and once you start doing the application, it also actually helps you with the concept. So how do you use this information as you are studying to be able to do things in layers? Firstly, I will just say, number one, when it is hard, leave it. So when it is hard, leave it. How does this help with breaking things down? Your brain has a very good understanding of the things that it can assimilate easily. And it can only assimilate things where you are building on top things that are already existing. So if your logic layer, for example, if your logic understanding, you don't understand the logic of the topic, the concepts are literally going to be very hard for you to understand. So if you try to read the concepts and you discover that it's hard for you to understand, just take a step back and think about, okay, what is just the logic of this topic? And you can actually take that further to just going a step below. For example, if you are in grade 12, for example, and there's a topic that you're unable to understand, you're unable to understand calculus, possibly you don't understand arithmetic. So just go back a step and see if you understand arithmetics, because your arithmetics is going to be your logic layer for your calculus. If you're a medical student, you're in your clinical area, and you seem not to be able to understand a lot about disease as well, you just go back to your basic sciences. Think of your pathology, because your pathology becomes your logic layer. If your pathology is also not making sense, well, maybe you don't know the normal. You go back to the physiology, normal physiology and normal anatomy. And just by doing that, it may look like it is taking a lot of your time, but it is actually going to help you learn faster. And the kind of learning that you will get from that is the learning that sticks, because you will memorize less and understand more. Now, the other thing about knowledge that I could tell you is that a lot of people saw knowledge is power. Knowledge is not power. Knowledge only has the potential to be power. So if you have learned this and you have gained the knowledge, it does nothing for you unless you try it out. And when you try it out, drop in the comment section below to tell me the struggles that you have, so that I could create even an extended video to explain more. And if you're interested in this and you would like a step-by-step process in how you can use this, these are one of the things that I teach in my course, which is coming up, the Optimal Learning Skills course, which I explain in more depth and slowly with a demonstration. And so if that is something that you may like, you can just click the link and join the waiting list. And if by the time you're watching this video, the course would have already been launched, I'll also attach the link for you to be able to access the course. All right, guys, see you next time.